From a toddler falling into a pit full of crocodiles to a man being mauled by 4 crocodiles at once, we count down the 7 most horrifying crocodile attacks on people around the world. Number 7. Amelie Osborn-Smith. It was November 2021 when 18-year-old Amelie passed her A-levels at school in England and decided to take a gap year in Africa. During her time away from home, Amelie and her friend decided to take part in a professionally organised whitewater rafting expedition on the Zambezi River. Having spent the morning rafting, the group decided to stop for lunch on a quiet part of the river, believed to be safe from crocodiles. And when the guides encouraged the group to take a quick dip, Amelie and her friend excitedly jumped in. But as they waded around enjoying the cool water, Amelie felt something brush over the top of her legs. Thinking it was her friend, she turned around, but her friend was right beside her. Confused, she turned back, and just as she saw the massive body of a crocodile, it crunched down on her leg with its powerful jaws and began dragging her under the water into a death roll. Seeing Amelie disappearing, her friend quickly grabbed her life jacket, desperately trying to save his friend. Unable to breathe and nearly drowning, Amelie kicked the crocodile repeatedly, fighting for her life. Miraculously, it let go, and Amelie was hauled back into the boat. With her foot hanging loose and rapidly losing blood, Amelie lay in the boat in excruciating pain, waiting for a helicopter to arrive. She was eventually airlifted to hospital, where she underwent multiple surgeries and is expected to make a full recovery. Number 6. Suti Ramadani. It was 2021 when 8-year-old Sudi and her friends visited Teluk Kali River on the Indonesian island of Buru. As the children played on the riverbank, the cool water lapped at their feet. Unable to resist, they innocently waded into the water, despite the river being known to locals as crocodile infested. And as the children splashed around, laughing and enjoying the water, suddenly a giant crocodile crunched down on Sudi's tiny body. No match for the giant predator, Sudi was dragged away while her friends screamed helplessly. Locals rushed in to help, but Sudi disappeared under the water's surface. Locals and family tried desperately to find her, and when the crocodile eventually surfaced nearby with Sudi's head in its jaws, they launched at the predator with spears. But when they cut into the beast's stomach, Sudi's remains were not inside. A search and rescue was immediately conducted, and sadly, Sudi's remains were found 2 days later. Number 5. Ricky Garnier. It was July 26th in 2020 when 14-year-old Ricky and his auntie visited a local river in the Kuching area in Malaysia for the day. And as Ricky looked for snails along the riverbank, his aunt watched from a short distance away. But what they didn't know is that as Ricky made his way along the riverbank, a 4-metre crocodile was stalking him underneath the water, silently following him up the river. And when Ricky found another snail, he leaned down to pick it up. Suddenly, the crocodile launched out of the water. In an instant, it crunched down on his foot and dragged him back into the water. Distraught, Ricky's aunt screamed for help, but the crocodile disappeared under the surface, with her nephew in its jaws. Emergency services rushed to the scene, but it was too late. Ricky was gone. A search was conducted immediately, and 6 days later they were able to locate the crocodile who took Ricky's life, just 3 kilometres from where he was attacked. Unable to catch the crocodile, rescue officers had to use a chicken to bait it, and it was finally pulled onto the shore where its stomach was checked. Sadly, there were human remains inside that were identified as belonging to Ricky. His remains were returned to his distraught family, and a funeral was held for the teenager in their village shortly after. Number 4. Demis Malkin Siputra. In 2021, 8-year-old Demis was fishing with his father on the bank of a river in East Kalimantan, Indonesia. As they stood in the shallows reeling in fish, they were unaware that a giant crocodile was watching them from underneath the surface. And when Demis strayed away from his father and into the deeper water, the predator launched at him. Demis's father rushed in, punching the crocodile with his bare hands in a desperate attempt to make it release his son. And when the crocodile took off, he chased after it. But the crocodile was too quick. It sank into the depths of the river with Demis in its jaws. Authorities were alerted and a search was conducted immediately. The crocodile was quickly located 100 metres away. It was dragged ashore where locals chanted Demis's name in the hopes that he was still alive. But when they cut the crocodile open, residents broke down in tears when Demis's lifeless body was found inside. He appeared unharmed, as though the crocodile had swallowed him whole. Devastated, the community took Demis away and held a funeral for the beloved boy a few days later. Number 3. Alexander Chimurza. It was January 2022 when local Zimbabwe fisherman Alexander was searching for redworms near a local pond in the Kariba area to use as bait to catch fish to feed his family. As he searched along the bank of the pond, he slowly came closer and closer to the water's edge. But since the water in the pond was so murky, he couldn't see that a pack of 4 massive Nile crocodiles were watching him from underneath the surface, waiting to ambush him. And as Alexander crouched down and reached to search through some weeds on the edge of the pond, one of the crocodiles burst out of the water to grab his left hand. Instinctively, Alexander dodged the blow, but as he moved aside, a second crocodile quickly crunched down on his right hand, ripped him into the murky water and took him into a death roll, violently spinning him 6 times under the water. Terror flowed through him, but Alexander knew that if he resisted the crocodile's powerful force, his hand would break. So he allowed his hand to go in the direction it turned, and when the crocodile finally finished its roll, Alexander desperately tried to stand up in the water. But the other 3 crocodiles moved in, one crunching down on his thigh and the other piercing through his ankle. The crocodiles had hold of all 4 of his limbs, ready to begin their feeding frenzy. It was over. But seeing the commotion, Alexander's friends began pelting rocks at the predators, desperately trying to help their friend. Amazingly, this gave Alexander the opportunity to get his left hand free from the jaws of one of the crocodiles, and in a desperate attempt to save himself, he quickly shoved his hand down the throat of the crocodile that had his right hand in its jaws. He reefed on the crocodile's palatal valve, which stops water from pouring into their stomachs when they're underwater. As water rushed into the crocodile's throat, one of the rocks smashed it on the head, and amazingly, the crocodile died and let go along with the other crocodiles as well. Exhausted from the 40-minute-long ordeal, Alexander made his way back to the edge of the water as quickly as he could, before the crocodiles moved in on him again. His friends used a stick to pull him in and flag down an ambulance. He was rushed to hospital where he spent the next 40 days enduring multiple major surgeries to repair broken bones, perform skin grafts, and reattach a torn Achilles tendon. And after finally being released, he then got readmitted to hospital after doctors found one of the crocodile's teeth embedded in his leg. But he has since returned home, where his wife is caring for him. And although Alexander is just happy to have survived, he faces a long journey to recovery, and is not expected to ever regain use of his right arm. Number 2. Melissa and Georgia Laurie. It was 2021 when British twins Melissa and Georgia set out on a backpacking trip around the world, and after 3 months they decided to move to Mexico to undertake volunteer work. On the 7th of June, shortly after arriving, they employed a tour guide to show them and 2 other friends around. As they explored the country with their guide, they were eventually taken to the popular tourist destination Manialtepec Lagoon, just west of Puerto Escondido, which is known for its bioluminescent algae, which is only visible at night. And after being assured by their guide that the lagoon was completely safe to swim in, the girls decided to go for a dip in the mesmerising water. But what they didn't know was that their guide was actually unlicensed, and that the Manialtepec Lagoon is a well-known nesting area for crocodiles in the rainy season. And the rainy season runs from May to November every year. And as the sisters waded around in the water, laughing and enjoying themselves, Melissa suddenly noticed the head of a crocodile slowly rise out of the water 15 metres away from her. She stared into its eyes as it watched her silently. Terrified, she screamed out to her sister and friends. The group swam as fast as they could to the shore. The others reached it and climbed into the mangroves, but Melissa, the weakest swimmer in the group, was the last to reach the bank of the lagoon, and as she reached up to grab her friend's outstretched hand, who was on a mangrove trying to help her, the crocodile lunged forward, grabbed her hand and ripped her under the water. It spun her around and around in a death roll. Unable to breathe and desperate for air, Melissa passed out, and when the crocodile let go, her body rose to the surface of the water. Her sister Georgia, who was on the bank, saw her body floating face down, and without a second thought she jumped back into the water to save her. She reached her unconscious sister and began to drag her back to shore, but on their way, the crocodile came back, attacking them again and again, trying to drag Melissa away. Desperate to save her sister, Georgia bashed the crocodile repeatedly with her fists, but the crocodile kept coming for them. It bit Melissa once again, then turned on Georgia and began biting her. But Georgia didn't give up. She fought against the predator with everything she had, and miraculously, the crocodile eventually gave in and swam away. Georgia then hauled her sister, who was drifting in and out of consciousness, into a boat, whose crew had heard the commotion and come to their rescue. Suffering from deep bite wounds, Melissa fought to stay alive while they waited for an ambulance. Both girls were rushed to hospital, where they eventually made a full recovery. Speaking on the attack, Melissa stated that she wouldn't change the attack, because it has given her a new outlook on life. In fact, both sisters are calling for greater protection of crocodiles in Mexico after local authorities proposed a cull following the attack. The girls stated, "Just because a traumatic event has happened, it doesn't leave us wishing that the crocodiles pay the price. It's not their fault." Number 1. Ron Roth. Crocodile farms in the Siem Reap area are common in Cambodia, where families rely on breeding crocodiles for their leather. Crocodile farming had been in the Roth family for generations, and Rom's father, Mr. Roth, had enjoyed running his family's crocodile farm after his parents had given it to him to take over 5 years before. As his parents did before him, Mr. Roth kept his crocodiles in a pit away from the house, and as he and his wife began to expand their own young family, he decided to put a fence around the pit to keep his children safe. But in 2019, his worst nightmare was realised. His wife had just given birth to their second child, a younger sister to their 2-year-old daughter Rom. And on a day like any other, Mr. Roth had travelled into town while his wife and 2 children stayed at home. While her mother tended to her newborn baby, 2-year-old Rom wandered off, and when Mr. Roth returned home from town later that day, his daughter was nowhere to be found. Fearing the worst, he desperately searched for his daughter, and when he finally reached the crocodile pit, he looked down. What he saw shocked him to the core. On the concrete floor of the pit, amongst the crocodiles, he saw the remains of his beloved daughter. Distraught, he looked closer and saw that 2 crocodiles were still fighting over what was left of his daughter's skull. With his wife screaming for their lost daughter and unable to bear the pain himself, he jumped into the enclosure, retrieved his daughter's remains, and returned them to his grief-stricken wife. Police launched an investigation into the tragic incident and believed that although Rom's father had built a fence around the enclosure, being so tiny, Rom had been able to climb through a small gap and had fallen into the pit, where the crocodiles had then attacked her. Rom's father has stated that it is his biggest regret in life to lose his daughter to his own crocodiles, and Rom's parents have since had to sell their crocodile farm, unable to continue living with the pain of losing their daughter there. That's it for this video. Catch you later.